Alright, in this video I just want to talk real quick about prophecy. Just thinking out loud. Just listening to some discussions and studies on prophecy and revelation, and I just figured, I'll put my 2 cents in. A lot of the focus had to do with Revelation 17, the beast and the woman riding the beast. It was talking about the 10 toes of Daniel's statue being the 10 horns from the beast in Daniel 7 and then in Revelation 17 there. And about how Daniel also talks about how there's an 11th that's more stout, comes uproots 3 of the other 10 kings and speaks very boastful things. So there'll end up being 8 kings when the 11th comes up. And he's talking about the 7 kingdoms as the 7 heads in Revelation 17, how one of them received a deadly wound, but it's revived that the 8th is actually one of the 7, and it comes back as part of the beast. And I speculated that at times that the deadly wound actually happened to the nation of Israel, right? And I thought it was interesting because God basically gave them over to Babylon because they went after other gods, right? And when Jesus was on earth, the religious leaders of Israel said we had no king but Caesar. So again, they joined themselves with the beast system, right? So I was like, yeah, I think they might be one of the heads. Because they were completely destroyed. Well, their nation was completely destroyed and revived, the way Israel has. And everybody wandered after the beast, like, whoa, right? Everybody wandering after Israel. You get a bunch of Zionists, whether they're Jews or Christians, that are gung-ho for Zion or Israel. This kind of, makes a little bit of sense there, right? Not to mention, I was thinking this Antichrist fella is going to be a Jew, and Israel is more stout than the rest, so when this little horn comes up, he's going to knock off 3 other kingdoms somehow and establish himself. Maybe has something to do with the neighboring nations, maybe Egypt. What do we got? Some Jordan, Saudi Arabia near there and stuff. Who knows? Maybe 3 of them are going to be uptaken, and Israel is going to really establish a foothold, and they would be a bit more of a powerhouse than they already are. And so I was like, yeah, that it can make some sense. It seems to fit as of right now. But this guy talking about the prophecies was looking at Assyria, saying Assyria is one of the nations that's been gone, done away with. Because we look at other nations that have to do with Israel is still there, because Medo-Persia is there in Iran, Babylon is there as Iraq, Egypt is still there, and a lot of these other nations exist, and they might exist by a different name, but saying the Assyrian is done, it's gone. And I was thinking, well, what is it, Syria? Didn't they just change the name up a little bit? But what do I know, right? Not to mention the beast is usually considered Gentile kingdoms, right? So maybe Israel doesn't have a part in that. But at the same time, like I said, God let Israel go in with the beast system, and they said they had no king but Caesar, right? That doesn't necessarily make them part of the beast. And one of the things that this guy said that actually got me thinking that, hey, this deadly wound, maybe it's not Israel. Maybe it is something like Assyria or even Babylon comes back or something, or what a lot of people think of is the Roman Empire is reestablished, right? And I was thinking about that, and I was like, you know what? It actually makes sense. What we see going on with Russia and the Ukraine is that the Ukraine and I think Norway and maybe one or two other nations are actually trying to become part of NATO. So we see that more nations are joining up to become part of basically the Western Roman Empire. It's either you become part of the Western or you become part of the Eastern, part of Russia. And I was like, yeah, that could be it. It could be the final forming of the feet and the 10 toes coming together. I was like, yeah, it might be part of that actually happening right now. Could be. Could very well be. It's making a lot of sense. And so I'm more leaning towards that it is the Roman Empire that seemed to have a deadly wound, but it's kind of just dormant, comes back, right? See it start to revive in the League of Nations, and then with uh, this United Nations NATO thing now. So it might have something stronger coming up. You never know. And each of these developments happened after a world war, and everybody's talking about possible World War III breaking out, and it's already started. It's just a matter of time before more people get involved, more nations, that is. And so it's like, okay, maybe that's how it's going to form up. Uh, excuse me. So the thing that really got me to thinking that this also makes sense is that this guy was saying that the woman riding the beast isn't the Catholic Church. And I was like, you know what, that makes sense that it isn't, because in Revelations chapter 3 and 4 we read about the church, and then in Revelation chapter 4 we read about the church getting raptured, and chapter 5 we read about the church bowing down and worshiping and singing a song to Jesus, and then there's no more mention of the church for the tribulation. It has to do with Israel and the Jews and the Gentiles. And in the church, in Jesus, there is no Jew or Gentile. But outside of that, there's Jew and Gentile. Like we read Revelation 7, 144,000 Jews and a great multitude of Gentiles. So we know that this isn't dealing with the church anymore. So the woman that is a virgin should automatically be realized that it's not the bride, because the bride's a virgin that's married to Jesus, doesn't give birth to Jesus, that this woman is Israel, with the 12 stars representing the 12 tribes of Israel, as Joseph saw his brothers as stars, right? Clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. This is Israel. And after the man-child is taken up, she flees into the wilderness for 3.5 years, right? And this guy was saying that this is the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. I was like, okay, I'll hear you out. That's the first 3.5 years. All right. He's saying, but after that time, she gets caught up in everything and ends up riding the beast. Because you see, it's one of those. Sorry, I'm yawning a lot all of a sudden. One of these things where, like, a narcissist wants to get back at his enemy, but he can't. This is like Satan trying to get at God. He can't get to God, so what is he going to do? He's going to try to seduce his lady there, Israel, and woo her away. And she becomes a harlot and does so. But then what ends up happening to her? well, everybody turns on her and destroys her. The woman is destroyed, right? It devours her. And that's exactly how Satan is. He doesn't care about his enemy's wife or anything like that, daughter or what have you. He just wants to hurt him, so he seduces her to hurt his enemy, and then after he's done that and he really guts her wrapped around his finger, he just tosses her aside and doesn't give two shits about her, right? So I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that this woman is actually uh, Israel, and it might not have to be actual all of Israel. You can see that the virgin woman can represent Israel that has accepted Jesus as the Messiah, but there's also a bunch of Jews who don't, and they go after the Antichrist. Excuse me, and they end up riding the beast, but it's only temporary. And it makes a lot of sense because this woman is supposed to be drunk off the blood of the saints, and Jesus says that to the religious leaders of the Jews that they are guilty of the blood shed from righteous Abel until Zacharias, who is John the Baptist's father at that time. So when we read about this harlot actually being drunk off the blood of the saints, it seems like it probably has to do with Israel, the religious leadership there. So there's a lot of stuff to make sense to that, and yeah. So I think that is about it. That is about it. Just thinking out loud. This picture has very little to do with the video. I just put in prophecy. This one looked interesting. I don't know if it has to do with a movie or some band, but it looked like a doomsday clock, kind of like a Mayan thing, I guess, but it also had a nuke going off, and the birds flying in, I guess, to eat the flesh of kings and nobles and horses and all that, like it said in Revelation. So I was like, yeah, okay, talk about prophecy and Revelation, some kind of Armageddon thing. So this picture fits. But yeah, that's about that. Probably gonna fall asleep here. So thanks for watching and take care.